is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 751. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, what's going on, man? How are things?
Not a whole lot. It's the summer. We got MH3 coming soon here, coming in hot. Those sets are always fun to draft, and I've just been enjoying, Cube, enjoying the fact that there's an arena open this weekend in OTJ. So I've done a couple of drafts this week, keep my game face on. And there's so much good Magic to play because Ikoria is also on arena right now. And that format's actually kind of a forgotten format because it came out during the pandemic. There wasn't a whole lot of paper tournaments. And it's a really fun one.
Yeah, I know that particularly one person loves Ikoria as a format, and that's our guest back on the show again for his touch point for OTJ for us. It is Sierkovitz. Sierky, welcome back on the show. You're a huge fan of Ikoria, right?
Oh yeah, I live for the thing. I literally started jamming as soon as it hit arena on the return. It's a great format. I think it's like an ultimate sandbox format. It's like the self-contained cube basically, and I love that about it. I have it's a format that gains when you're super deep into it because then you figure out weird archetypes. My friend yesterday did a deck that was all revolving around Luca Coppercoat Outcast and not having any creature that is more expensive than 3 mana except for 1 6-mana Kogla that he was basically trying to transmogrify in his deck, and the rest was just expensive interaction. So you can build those kind of sweet things, and I love it.
Wow, that's a good sales point for this set right there. That sounds awesome.
Ikoria's got, I think, my favorite limited card of all time, one of my favorite cards of all time in general, Lurrus. Lurrus is so fun to build around. Lurrus committed a lot of grievous sins in other formats, but in limited, it's actually just a masterpiece.
Yeah, I know that you're a big fan of drafting it in Vintage Cube even. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's great. I mean, you start out with a Lurrus, you just end up with a really fun deck.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that Ikoria is where we had the companions come in, which, as you said, I mean, I left a bad taste in a lot of people, but after they got fixed, then all of a sudden those became great. And I don't know, for limited, we generally liked the companions. The only thing that felt kind of weird about them sometimes was that it was better just to play them. That the idea of building around them wasn't really worth it, and for some of them. But anyway, Ikoria's back. We got MH3 coming soon as well. We've been talking about that, and when we're going to do the set review for that, it may be as early as next week, depending on schedules and when all the cards have been released. I actually had a chance to draft that set to do the debut video for Wizards of the Coast, which just came out. I'll put a link in the show notes for that, and you can see it. And I had a good time. I was like, wow, that they let me look at the cards ahead of time, just to kind of familiarize myself a little bit. But it was, I only had a very small window of time to do so. So I quickly gave up on trying to actually understand what was going on. But let's just say there is a lot going on as far as number of mechanics and how you kind of have to know a bunch of stuff, I think, to really get into MH3. But it's going to be on Arena and paper and all that stuff too. So definitely something made for us drafters, no doubt about it. We're going to be talking, of course, about Outlaws, Thunder Junction with Sierko this episode. Before we do, we wanted to say thank you to each and every one of our patrons over on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And we really appreciate you supporting us there. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard, the best in the business. If you want deck boxes, sleeves, that kind of stuff to take care of your cards, your decks, your collection, Ultimate Guard is absolutely the best place to go for all of that kind of stuff. If you ever just get your hands on any of their product, you'll just go, whoa, this is really, really nice. I remember when they first came out, and I was really impressed by the quality of the, craftsmanship on it. And that was in an era when deck boxes and sleeves were kind of just, I don't know, it was more about what it looked like rather than how it performed. And with Ultimate Guard, you kind of get the best of both worlds. If you want to check them out, you can go to ultimateguard.com and check out all their products, and you can pick them up from your favorite online retailer or your local game store. one of the things you get for being a patron of the show is you get access to the Patreon feed. Everybody gets access to that. And that's where I put up a thread, for example, for Patreon question of the week, which we have here. This one comes from Grayson, who says, as a longtime Magic player and almost exclusively a limited player these days, I feel like bonus sheets are sometimes fun, but are kind of kludgy approximations of what makes Cube Draft so good. Interesting build-arounds, format depth, and replayability, etc. Do you think that we'll ever see Cube become a core offering from Wizards of the Coast rather than a seasonal or sometimes thing? Or do you think it will remain niche? He says, maybe I'm in a small minority, but I'd probably spend 300% more money on Arena if it were just a Cube client. Luis, what do you think?
It's hard for me to know where WotC lands on Cube, because on the one hand, it's just like an immensely powerful game mode, right? Like super popular. You get to use all these different cards. You get to kind of make new content without even making new cards. Like new cards do help with what Cube is up to, but you really don't need like a new set. Even you can change the Cube a bunch without having to print new stuff. That said, it does take away from their kind of like standard offering sets, and it doesn't. If you go even further and look at like real cards, like paper cards, it doesn't give you a ton of reasons to spend a lot of money. Like you can buy, like I buy new cards when Cube comes out, but I'm not buying a box of the new set or anything like that. And you're not buying as much as like standard. And you know what, Commander kind of has this issue too, where like to some degree people don't need to buy new cards for Commander, but of course they will. If a card strikes their fancy. And I think in general, I think that Cube is great, but they don't want it to be more popular than a lot of their other offerings. And that's a kind of tricky balance to hit, to be honest.
Yeah, it does seem like a natural home for Cube to be in digital, right? Where they can charge you to play it over and over and over again. Even if it is a relatively small amount and it's not, you feel like you're getting your value for it, but it does incentivize you to keep coming back and kind of putting a quarter into the machine, over and over again, where, if you build a cube at home, you could just have your friends over and play that same cube for years and not do it. And similar, like you said, with Commander. Sierky, what do you think about Cube becoming a more prominent part of the limited offering from Wizards?
I do have my thoughts. They might be naive, and I would like to restrict that option very heavily. I generally think that Arena is a bad system for. It's basically what Arena tried to do is to one-to-one copy the system of Paper Magic, but without the trades, and then play like that. I always thought that Arena should be: you get Arena, you get access to all the cards. They don't care. They should just give people all the cards, and it should make money from tournaments and people signing in for tournaments, playing them, and then having some prize money. But the prize money doesn't cover the full price, but it gets premium to Arena, and you can pay for the drafting and whatnot. But I think that's how it should
I can tell
operate.
you as a game developer, that's not going to fly. That's not how these games make money. It's not really going to be very close to them wanting to do that. I understand why, from a player perspective, that would be better, but you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to make money doing that.
Does it just not make enough money, Luis, compared to the other models?
I mean, enough isn't really like the word I would use. It's just you make more money with the other models, and players have accepted that. You don't really have a strong reason to do it in a different way.
I see. Yeah, because just listening to Sierky say it. Yeah, it makes sense from a player perspective where it's like, yeah, I can just show up, I get all this stuff. But yeah, if the industry has kind of put its foot down about, we can charge you for digital objects or however you want to describe them, then I suppose that they will do that. Sierky, you're not a huge cube guy, are you?
I am not a huge cube guy, but not sort of by my own choice. Like if there would be vintage cube on Arena, I would be jamming it probably a lot, because I do like the idea of a cube.
So
I played
you're just a big Arena guy. You don't really, Matt. And I know you said before you can't really stand Magic Online.
No, I refused to play it when it was first released, and I continue to refuse playing it. But I did play my first vintage cube a couple of weeks ago at at a friend's house in actual paper. Some proxies were there. And it was a lot of fun. And I did manage to play turn 2 channel into Ulamog, and it was fun for one person.
Okay, that's really nice.
For one person, it was fun.
Yeah.
And I do play the Arena cubes occasionally. I don't think that I like them as much as I would like the Vintage cube. It's just I get the feeling of that. I still play it, and I still make content about it. But I usually invite an expert when I do a cube episode because I don't feel like I should be an authority on cube.
Do you know any experts or?
Well, I had Luis last time. Yeah. I had 2 guests on Cube, and it was Luis, Scott-Vargas, and Jean-Emmanuel Depras. So you need to have at least a 2-barrel. A 2-barrel surname is a requirement. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there's you got more than just that. You got 2
Jean-Emmanuel is his.
Okay.
It's his
I
first
knew that
name
he's going to catch me on that. Damn it.
Yeah.
A 3-letter acronym.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I always wonder, how these things move forward with that. Because, you can take a look at Magic Online and the Vintage Cube right now as well, where I think there's a lot of players like me who more or less treat Magic Online as a Vintage Cube machine. Like when it's up, that's when I go bring up Magic Online and play. I actually don't mind Magic Online at all. Like I'm quite comfortable with the interface, and, there is that steep hill when you first start playing on it where it can feel punishing, or you can skip through your turn on accident, but a couple of keyboard maps and a little bit of practice, and all of a sudden you're kind of cruising along. And so I don't mind it from that perspective, but the ease of entry for just jumping into a tournament or whatever is just unmatched on Arena. Also, the fact that you can play it on your tablet or your phone or kind of wherever you're at also helps a lot too. So, for my normal set drafting, I do generally stick to Arena because what I find is that like I tend to be doing one thing. It's like if it's cube season, I'm drafting a bunch of cube, and if it's the new set, I'm drafting the new set. But I rarely bounce back and forth in the middle of it. Like it's pretty rare for me to like do 3 cube drafts and then just jump over and do 1 OTJ and then back to cube. Like I'll just sort of stick with what I'm doing until the next thing comes along, generally speaking. And Arena makes that, really easy as well. But, I don't really know what happens to Magic Online if there's too many of me, right, that just want to show up in cube draft, but aren't really, like I'm not really partaking in the ecosystem. Right. I'm just doing phantom events. I have a small collection on there now, but I used to have a big one, and I used to trade and, do a whole lot more stuff than that, but I don't now. And I don't really know how that affects everything else.
Well, but, what I can say is that you've got a lot of different systems going here, a lot of different kind of like stakeholders to serve. And one of the big ones is that they need to keep Magic Online going because that's how you play older formats. Those cards aren't on Arena. And the longer they keep it going, the less they have to tackle with the pretty thorny issue of what happens to all the cards on Magic Online. Yeah. They're not going to reimburse people or pay people out for that, but we're talking, if not 8 digits, as like 20 million plus. Like, I don't think it's quite 9 digits of cards in terms of like dollar value, but like I would be shocked if it wasn't in the like $10 to $30 million of value on and probably more. I bet some of the bot chain people can be like, no, you're completely off. It's actually 170 million or more.
Sure.
Because Magic Online has been making X millions per year for years and years. And when the money comes in, Magic Online is a relatively efficient system for the players. It's actually one of the reasons on Arena and all the new games from any publisher pretty much don't let you trade cards. Trading with other players is a very efficient marketplace. Like you can go to the bots and you can buy a card for 10, sell it to them for 9 or whatever, or sometimes the spread's even less than a ticket. Wizards likes to collect all that value and make you buy the packs and do all that like on Arena, which again, I'm not, just to be clear, none of what I'm saying is a value judgment. I'm just kind of describing what's happening.
Right.
And Magic Online is worth a lot of money because of that, because when you buy, let's say you buy 300 tickets from the Magic Online store, which first of all, it's even more efficient to buy from other players, but plenty of people buy through the store. When you use those tickets are basically converted to value for someone at a very close to 1-to-1 rate. If you spend those tickets to join an event and you lose, you're out $30, right? But the prizes of that event get paid out to someone. And overall, Magic Online doesn't take a huge rake there. So people end up with a lot of value of stuff. The longer Wizards can kick that can down the road and not deal with it, the better. I mean, I'm sure it's within their rights to just shut down Magic Online and everyone who had cards on there out of luck. they don't want to do that. They don't want to piss off all these really enfranchised people who are spending lots of money still. So they're probably pretty happy that Cube is kind of becoming a bigger and bigger part of Magic Online. I know I'm happy about that.
Just so it still exists?
Well, both because Magic Online exists and because it's a great place to play Cube. It's a very powerful engine. Like, people, maybe some on this call bag on Magic Online, but it's actually a very powerful program. I'm not going to say it looks the best or is as slick as Arena, but I personally prefer to play on Magic Online. It's a much more precise program too. It's a lot easier to do exactly what you want to do. Like, there's a lot of Cube decks or older format decks I would be a little bit, not the most excited to play on Arena versus play on Magic Online.
Yeah.
And they've kind of settled as like Magic Online is where you go for the cubes, and like they do tons of the cube events. They even put up 64s again. Thank you, Daybreak. You're the best. But Arena is where you go for the new set drafts. And I think you can see that if you had all the data, which Wizards does, they can look at how many people draft, Outlaws of Thunder Junction on Magic Online versus Arena. I'm sure it's just not comparable in any way, shape, or form. And that way, both programs get to hum along and make good money from new set releases and all that stuff. Will they want to open that can of worms and put Cube on Magic Arena? Because Cube on Arena is the closest you can get to what Sierkovitz is saying, where you don't need to own any of the cards, you just play in the events. Cube does that in a way that's a lot more, like, on a longer tail than OTJ, or any set, right? Like, any set comes out, people draft it, more people draft at the beginning, it tapers down, then a new set comes out. Cube could rob a lot of that, and maybe you make less money if Cube is there. Like, that is something you have to contend with. Like, did Blizzard make money because they released Hearthstone Battlegrounds? Fantastically popular game mode. It's one of the most popular games on Earth if you look at all the games, right? It's in the top echelon. You spend a lot less money on Battlegrounds than you do on Hearthstone proper because you don't buy cards on Battlegrounds.
That's interesting.
Like, literally, if there's two worlds, one where Battlegrounds invented, one where it's not, it is possible Blizzard makes more money in the world where it's not invented. That said, there's a lot of value to making games that are popular and people really like, and Battlegrounds has done a lot for them there. So I'm not saying it's a failure. I'm just saying some games let people give them opportunity to spend more money on a recurring basis than others. And, depending on what your goals are as a game manufacturer, as a publisher, but you want one or the other, but I can tell you my experience with most publishers is they're really concerned about how much money they make at the end of it, because that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how this look differently from the Hearthstone Battlegrounds, because here you also sort of popularize the paper version, and then people who play for free online might actually go into playing paper and buy actual cards.
Well, that's
and this
the thing.
kind of that piece of
yeah. That's a really good point, because Wizards has this extremely profitable end goal here. And if they can convert you, if Arena is the free-to-play mode where people who play on Arena spend very little or no money, depending on who it is, obviously you look at all the players. But if you were to tell Wizards the average player in Arena spends $0, but you get to convert a third of those into paper play, they would be like, this is the best program I could ever make.
Right.
Wizard Magic on paper Magic players, dedicated ones, they spend hundreds of dollars a year, if not much more.
Right.
And that's, we're talking about the most enfranchised who can spend many thousands a year. But if your average player spends $300 a year, you're just making so much money,
right.
And Wizards obviously has what that number is. I would guess it's probably closer to $600 or $700 a year,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little less. I don't know. Depends which population exactly you're talking about. But Arena as an onboarding tool is great for them, whereas Battlegrounds doesn't really give you somewhere to go from that. I love Battlegrounds. It's a fantastic game. Like I've said many times on LR, I'm telling you the perspective of the things that I kind of understand about game development. My perspective as a player I don't care how much money the companies I'm playing their games of make. That's not really my concern. I just want to play the things I want to play.
Yeah, it's interesting too to think from the big picture, right? Cube could have a element of this for kind of the limited section of players, but Commander certainly the bigger bear in the room, right? Which is that Commander has similar problem as you said, Luis, where you can just kind of get a deck or two, and then the most you might want to do is swap out a card when a new set comes out, pick up a card here or there. But you have to think that, especially if you compare it to when Wizards kind of viewed things through the lens of competitive players who spend a lot of money, who always need to get the latest stuff. They need to get 4 and many times of the latest cards. So they're the ones who are at the local game store being like, I'll take 4 of that mythic rare from the new set, which drives a lot of the demand. Commander players don't bring that. But look at the boom of just interest in the game and people playing, talking about, interacting with the game, that Commanders brought. And of course, when they first come in, they do buy a bunch of cards, to get caught up and to get those first few decks. And then there's a subset of Commander players who like to have 10, 12, Commander decks. And they're constantly...
The number of people I've seen say, like, I have 17 Commander decks and I like getting extras so I don't have to swap cards between them is not a small number.
Not at all. And I think that's kind of that's what keeps Commander really compelling from Wizards of the Coast perspective, is that people do spend enough, to do it. But you have to figure that the average Commander players after that initial push spends less per year than what a competitive player would have spent. But there's just so many, right? It makes you wonder just, almost from like as a marketing exercise, if you just have all these people playing and talking. Yes, they do buy, maybe not quite at the clip as your previous whales did or your previous enfranchised players, but I mean, just the numbers dwarf it, and I wonder if Cube could fit into that somehow, because it has a similar thing where you need a bunch of cards up front, and then people do build different cubes. When we talk about Cube, we're usually talking about vintage Cube as being kind of this, nostalgic, old school, powerful thing, but. Yeah, I keep going back to what Grayson said. I'd probably spend 300% more money on Arena if it were just a Cube client, and I do wonder about that as well.
Yeah, they have all the information. We can only speculate, but I'm sure that they're aware that, like, for every people like that, they might lose out on potential gains from the people who do play other game modes, because you can't charge as much for Cube because it's Phantom. One of the tricks about OTJ current sets is you get to charge a lot because you get the actual cards, and if the people don't use those cards for anything, that doesn't cost Wizards anything.
Yeah.
That's all great.
I've always wondered where what the big money makers are on Arena.
I assume that current set draft is going to be their number one.
You think so?
Well,
from my experience, is the Arena Open.
The Arena Opens are
Arena
good,
Open gets you
sure.
to 0 gems very quickly. In my case,
I don't know how many people on Arena buy gems in order to buy cards for their decks, but I have to imagine current set draft is pretty lucrative.
Okay, yeah, really interesting stuff. Thanks, Grayson, for the question there. Let's do a crack-a-pack for OTJ, and we'll use it to get a little bit of an idea of what Sierko's been drafting and how he views the format. Our first card out, we'll put you right to the test, Sierko. It's Festering Gulch. The green-black.
Yeah,
one of the better deserts.
So far, that's the card I would pick.
Would you say that you are likely to be knocked off of that?
I am likely to be knocked off
by
of
another
that.
common. By another common, let's say.
Very unlikely. Not very unlikely. I did have packs, and even in this set with like 7 rares per pack on average, I had packs where I first pick a desert sometimes. Because the things aligned. I think that they're really high picks. I think that they should be picked like around pick 3, 4, 5. I'd rather not pick them on pick 1, but Festering Gulch is top 3 of the deserts because it combines the color that most wants deserts, black, and the color that is the best color, green, which is a good combination.
You have the data, I don't, but are the top 3 deserts just the Obzon deserts?
I think that the top 3 deserts will be Sultai deserts.
Oh, okay. That was my second guess.
Because blue-black just needs the desert so badly to be able to play the.
I know. I would prefer to take a blue-black desert over a green-white desert early, but I do like the black-green covers all the bases.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a safe choice, and I do like the deserts.
Our next card up is Explosive Derailment.
And that's a close call for me. I think that at the beginning of the format, I would just close my eyes and pick Derailment, but now I would be actually starting to think about it. It's a good card.
On Desert now.
It's the best red common, but red didn't pan out to be the best color, and that's I think the problem. I still think it's like close. I would probably lean on the Gulch.
Okay.
Hopefully that's not a euphemism for something.
The next is Inventive Wingsmith.
Next,
Okay, next is Peerless Rope Master.
So that's like a neat card that I sometimes will play in my deck or sideboard in. It's really good against those 9/9 tokens that you get from the tumbleweed thing.
Yeah.
The one that... but that's about it. I mean, it's like a filler card or maybe a sideboard card. I want to see it on the wheel. It's not in the greatest of colors. Yeah.
Next is Mourner's Surprise.
It's a great card. I love it. I have a terrible win rate personally with it, but I know it's a good card. I don't know why I cannot put it to proper work. But it's supposed to be picked somewhere like mid-pack, like pick 5, 6, 7, 8. Sometimes it wheels.
Next up is Iron Fist Pulverizer, the 4/5 reach for 4 and a red.
Like, I know that some black manages to make this card work, but I leave it to some black to make those kind of things work.
Yeah, Sam Black can never be used as the example for why a card is good. You can't do it. Like, because if you try to play a Sam Black deck, it is not going to work for you. He is unique in that way. Last common is Quick Draw.
Next.
Okay, so you've got it down to Festering Gulch and Explosive Derailment right now, with maybe leaning towards the Gulch by a little bit. Okay. Uncommons. From the breaking news sheet, we have Tyrant's Scorn. It's a good card.
It's a great card, but it's multicolor, and therefore, I would rather not pick it so early. It is a really solid card. The dual functionality of it is fine. It's one of the cheap removals that Dimir decks really want. Mm-hmm. So if I would be like 2 seats down and I see a Tyrant Scorn and I already picked like, I don't know, Desert's Dew and maybe a desert or maybe like some kind of a strongish rare or uncommon in those colors, I would be super happy to have it. But I want to be already slightly invested in rather than to pick it as the first thing.
Next, I totally agree.
Next is Map the Frontier.
I actually played it in one deck.
Oh, okay.
But it was a very particular build where I had like half of my deck was 2 drops and the other half of my deck was 6-7 drops. So and they also spanned like 4 colors. And then this card was actually a perfect card for that particular deck. If you end up with it, you're gonna get it because it's gonna go late, hopefully. And if it doesn't, then you manage to live without it. So that's sort of like a card.
It's just been too slow otherwise.
Yeah, that was my sort of feeling.
Next is Arid Archway.
As much as I wish it was good.
Yeah, man, this was one of the more disappointing ones as the way it played out.
Yeah, why isn't it good? It should be good, right? Like these types of lands they offer
it's all
so
in the margins.
Much.
And I think this being colorless was a big part of it.
Yeah, if it was Civic Growth Chamber, it would have been much better.
Yes. I think if you remove the surveil text and just made it to any 2 colors, it would have been, I think, pretty good, especially if one of those colors was green.
Busted.
But I do think that, just colorless in a land in a deck that is probably playing 3 to 5 colors, it ended up being a little bit too much. Even if it was a green and a colorless, like the old Karoo lands, I think it's like Jungle Basin or something is the green one. I think it would have been good, but I don't think so.
Is it just unplayable?
I don't think it's just unplayable. It just doesn't typically perform well.
What about Cunning Coyote?
I love that card. You have picked for me so far, even though it's in red, which is the poorest color. But I actually had a very good result with Gruul decks, and I think that Coyote is specifically really good in Gruul decks because the +1 thing is important for those decks because most of their things have 3 power instead of 4 for some reason, and having that Coyote to activate your 4 power
bonuses,
is very useful. So yeah, I do like that card a lot. There are some really there's some back-breaking curve-outs with the Coyote. When you plot it on turn 2, on turn 3 you play the 3/3 Summoner. That's whenever you have a creature with power 4 and it attacks, you make a 3/1, and then you cast the Coyote, give it +1/+1, swing with those 2, make a 3/1. That's usually people don't come back from that kind of opening.
That's a huge swing. Last uncommon is Lively Dirge.
This is the card that I really like, but somehow I never pick it. So
Oh,
I
okay.
see it in the pack, but there's always like a better removal in the pack, or there is always something, or like something busted, and then it never comes back to me. So I played it a couple of times. Once with a card that may or may not appear very soon. It's like great when you have 1-drops and some 3-drops. I liked it in the decks that had like Honest Ratstein, and then I just put this 1/1 Nezumi Link Breaker to have together with it, so I can always tutor for one or for the other. It's great if I have the Nezumi Link Breaker and the what's the white side post uncommon? Reckless? No. Lawbreaker, something? Reckless Lawbreaker?
Oh, the Vindicator, the 3/2
The white black
that sacks
one?
a permanent. Yeah.
Yeah, that card's great.
So because that comes like in a package, you sort of like bring those two back, you kill something, you sacrifice, you get the mercenary. So there's like super niche combos. You have a bomb like Bristly Bill. I had that situation. I was just casting it, returning my 2/2 lifelinker and putting Bristly Bill on board from my library. So like it's like super flexible. It gets better when you already have something to fetch with it that you know it's worth, like a super good 4-drop or like a really bomby 2-drop. Then you're game for it. But I wouldn't first pick it, of course.
Right, and that's why you never end up with it.
And that's why I never end up.
Yeah, we did get 2 rares. The first one is
Whoa. What's that? It's like poverty.
Ty Joaquin Perfect Shot, the red-white 2/3.
I never played with it. I played against it, and it was really good. I mean, it makes those desert triggers kill you very quickly because any damage can be amplified with it. Yeah. It works with a couple of cards. You can draw a couple, and the baseline stats on it are good. It's like a 2-mana 3/2/3, so nothing to cry about. And I think white red, we might talk about it later, is not a terrible archetype. So if you feel like experimenting after listening to that episode, you might be picking it. Mm-hmm. Although probably not from this pack, though.
No, because we've got another rare. It's actually a mythic, and it is Bristlebud Farmer.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yay!
That's what I picked.
There we go.
We made it easy for you.
The card is fundamentally broken. I played once. I had a deck with it once, and every single time when it appeared, especially when you have it like in this kind of a grindier green-black, this does everything that you want. It's a bomb. It mills you. It creates card advantage. They kill it. You recur it. It's just like insane in those kind of.
They kill it.
shows.
You just get 2 food still. Totally
Yeah. But you always have an honest Ratstein if you're playing green black somehow. So yeah, no, that's one of the most powerful cards in the set.
Yeah, I think it's
not the most powerful.
Top 10, but yeah, something like that. So all right, Bristlebud Farmer. We made it easy. At the end of the day, interesting stuff up until the farmer, but yeah, it just kind of makes it an easy pick.
This is a pack that will serve like 6-7 drafters behind me.
Yeah, seriously,
there's
that's
like
a deep
really good
pack.
quality cards there.
For sure. How are you feeling about the format overall before we get into some of the more specific archetype type stuff? Are you enjoying it? Where are you at with it? Okay,
I'm going to go the convoluted way. So I felt a bit bad during the first part of this recording because we were talking about Ikoria, MH3, Cube, and I felt the poor OTJ was a bit abandoned, and it doesn't deserve to be abandoned. It was a very, very solid, good to very good set. I mean, it's not an all-timer for me, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I as soon as Ikoria is out of arena, I'm coming back to the good old OTJ and
well,
jamming some more.
Open this weekend, right?
I don't know. There's Ikoria on. I mean, also I'm out of gems probably by the time through Ikoria because I'll try crazy build arounds. So I don't know if I'm going to play.
When you drafted, you got currency after the end of the draft. Maybe we do our drafts like slightly.
Not if you try to companion. Not if you try to companion Yorion like I did yesterday.
They don't give you gems for that.
That'd have been you. I played against a Yorion companion yesterday. It did not work out well for them.
No, didn't for me as well. I switched the 40 card version, but I was already 0-2 down, and then I didn't manage to trophy with that. But coming back to OTJ, great set. It has a lot of life. I think I probably had the second highest win rate of all the LR guests that we're talking about OTJ. Because I'm not at the 69 level of Paul Cheon, but I got a solid 64-65% win rate from that.
Oh,
so I'm
very
not gonna
nice.
I'm not gonna complain about it. And I got it like in my own way. I drafted mainly Gruul for my winning drafts. I figured out how to make Gruul work, and it was slightly different from what most people are talking. Like one of my most played card was actually Gold Pan. And
really?
All my strategies were based around Gold Pan and maybe using the Gruul as a sort of like a splashy deck that can also be super aggressive if it wants to be.
Oh man, Gold Pan.
And a lot of life in it. I played like white-black attrition-y decks. I played Dimir controls. I never managed to pull the Archive Trap combo, unfortunately. But there's things you can do. There's plenty of build-arounds. The bonus sheet is great. I never cast a Cruel Ultimatum, but it was cast against me, and you can't even be angry at your opponent if they manage to pull it off. So it's like there's a lot of fun in it, and it's I think we will remember it fondly. And also, like, I know it's overloading that you have so many of those bonus sheets, and that is something that mildly annoys me. But once you get through it and you learn the cards, it actually is fun to have such a big selection of stuff, and because it widens your choices of what you can do. Like, if I opened Archive Trap right now, I would definitely try to build around it. And it's not that difficult, and you got a new archetype unlocked all of a sudden.
That was day one for Luis, by the way. But
yeah, literally day one.
Yeah.
I do think that the seeding a couple rares that just spawn archetypes is just such a good way to get such bang for your buck. I've talked about how the companions do that, like Luris and whatnot. And then also how things like Archive Trap do it, where it's like you get this one card, and all of a sudden you can draft a completely different deck, have a completely different experience, and that just gives a format legs for so long.
That's why I thought that Companion. I know that it has constructed problems, but for limited, it is the best limited mechanic, because it's one of the only mechanics that literally changes the way you're drafting because of the Companion, which is great. And I actually, when I played Ikoria,
super cool.
When I played Ikoria with my friends, I made the stipulation that we play the old Companion rules, because with old Companion rules, you open up things like drafting Umori decks for only creatures, for example, but you cannot do it when you have to pay the 3-mana tax. So yeah, but OTJ, fantastic and a lot of fun. And I play in the LGS. I'm one of those people that actually goes every Friday to the LGS, and we play a draft. And like those excited screens when someone opens a foil mana drain. And that's also something that is great. And then, totally. Of course, even more excited screams when they mana drain your 6-drop later in the game, and then cast something insane or like Villainous Well for 14 turn after that. This is what makes the game so great. And I think that OTJ delivered on those kind of amazing moments. It had some downs, like some bombs were a bit too bomby, I think. Like Bonipal could have been easily a mythic. But I think that Bonipal was the biggest kind of offender that was really undealable with the removal, and the rest was perfectly fine. You could kill the Rakdos. You could It was hard, but you could kill it. Like, yes, if the Laughing Jasper Flint stays alive for 4 turns, you're going to lose that game, but it's just the 3 toughness for free, really, so you can kill it somehow. And prioritize removal, you'll be fine.
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely, interestingly, had the feeling of going back to kind of what felt a little bit more like a quote normal set. It was interesting. I did a draft over at Adams, and my friend Woody hadn't played this set yet, and he was there, and he said, well, kind of what do I need to know? And it was kind of interesting because, my knee-jerk reaction was to kind of gear him up, for, hey, dude, it's different now, because he hasn't played too many sets. He played Lord of the Rings a bit because there was a tournament, but like he hasn't been playing routinely for the set, so he's not really up on this stuff. And, I was going to kind of get my speech going about, hey, it's faster now, like removal's a lot worse, cheap creatures are better, that kind of stuff. But that, I told him, I said, the things that about limited, they pretty much apply here. Like, removal's pretty good, and, make sure your mana is decent, draft some, individually powerful stuff and try to link it all together and you'll be fine, and I wouldn't have been able to tell him that for the past few sets. So that was, I think, really refreshing. And then it's a
kind of nice aspect to have, right? Like
it is.
It just feels like good fundamental limited. And not every set does feel that way.
It's a real feature somehow. And then, you know, on top of that, just some of the mechanics ended up feeling like kind of obvious, you know, like plot. You know, I was explaining to him how plot works, and I remember saying this when we first saw it, and I was just like, how has this not been a thing? Like, just that this was, you know, a mechanic that we haven't had before. It just felt so natural. And then same thing with Spree, where it was like, it's just another version of Kicker, but it's like slightly different, but it's like very like you just get it kind of right away, you know, when you see it. And, you know, those made for interesting gameplay, but also made it easy to integrate, you know, new mechanics in as well. So that to me leaves a little bit of room, you know, for more complication at a set level or a card level, you know, once you can kind of like grab onto a couple of mechanics really quickly.
I've said this before, but I think plot is just a really, I just give it a really high grade for like a really clean, satisfying implementation with a good amount of incentives to be doing the thing. Maybe the biggest strike against it is that blue is kind of bad in the format. So, you know, you don't get to play with like the blue plot stuff quite as much as you might think.
Like Lone Shark should be a card we play with all the time. And it's like,
yeah, and Lone Shark itself is good, and there's support for it. It's just blue overall doesn't quite get there. But I think plot's a great mechanic. I look forward to seeing it again in a couple of years, and it will be good then too. Like, it's just a very clean implementation. That stuff matters.
It does. And, you know, I mentioned this to Woody as well. And this to me is a big thumbs up to the design team for this type of stuff. So I said, this is how plot works. And then he said, okay. And I just told him in a sentence, you know, I said, you can do it now. You know, you do it now. Sorcery speed, any turn after this. Yeah, okay. And then he's like, so what are there like a bunch of cards that say when you plot something, you get a bonus? And I said, no, they actually did it really elegantly where you read the card and it says, hey, if you cast this without spending any mana, or if it's your second spell, cast this turn. And they just lead you as the player to link those things. Oh, I see, I can plot it and then it'll work well in that context, rather than just hitting us on the head, right? And saying like, when you plot a card, when you plot this, draw a card, or when you plot another card, there was very little referencing, you know, the blue-green guy was like, hey, your plot stuff's cheaper. But even that wasn't like a direct benefit of doing the plotting. And, you know, that to me is elegant game design, right? Like each of the cards that cared about plot did it in a slightly different way, but they let you as the player, it's, you know, especially for, you know, if you're a little bit newer, it's really fun to figure that stuff out. Oh, plot, that's interesting. How could I take advantage of this? And if it just says literally plot this and get a bonus, then it's like, okay, well, that's not as interesting as what they actually did here.
But, you know, I mean, every single mechanic in the set had something like that, like mounts, super intuitive because it is like vehicle, only on the other creatures. You easily get it. It gets some kind of a bonus. Spree is addressing what I was always annoyed with the multimodal spells, that you have the modal spells and there's like one mode that you pick 95% of the time. So you feel maybe less satisfied that you have this modality in it. And here I have a modality, but if I want to have the good mode, I pay 2 mana extra. And if I have the weaker mode, I pay 1 mana extra. And then also I can have all of it. That's just great, no? Because you can design those cards much more lopsided in terms of the power of different abilities, but you still can put them on the same card, which is like a super neat design strategy. It is less elegant because you have those different costs maybe, but it's still quite cool to have it. And, you know, for an advanced player, that shouldn't be a big of a challenge to figure that out. So I think every single mechanic was super neat in this set. And that helped with how the games were playing. And then, of course, you get like come back to the old cards that you never played with or never in that particular context. And it was also cool.
Yeah. In Humph we trust, as we said at the beginning. You did some digging around recently, Sierko, about how to figure out kind of which cards could help like a given archetype. What did you find? All
right. So I feel that this is a sort of method that grows with my every visit to the LR. Like every set I'm doing same things, but I'm adding some kind of new analysis on top of that. So if you remember last time, I was talking about looking at the win rate of a particular deck in the games that end at a particular turn. So obviously, like if you have an aggro deck, it will have high win rates in the early turns when the games end, because it's an aggro deck, it wants to kill fast. And then the longer the game lasts, the lower the win rate of that particular deck will be. So if you go to my slides that I did for the for this analysis, slide, let's say 9, then you can see this table for this set. And you can see that, for example, Selesnya is the most aggressive deck in the format. And if the games end on turn 4, 5, 6, 7, it has like over 60% win rate in those games. But then you go to the longer games, and if they last already like 12, 13, 14, 15, or more than 15 turns, you drop to 48% win rate. So there's like a big 20 percentage point difference between how much does this deck win in the early game and in the late game.
Okay.
And Gruul is also an early deck that wins around 60% early, but completely doesn't win longer games. It drops down to 42% even. So you either win or you probably don't.
You win right away or you don't at all. Yeah.
And then you have like White-Red, which has around 60%, but not quite in those early turns, and then drops to 48. So you have like a couple of those kind of decks that do much better in the early game. And then you have decks that do better in the late game. And examples are Blue-Black and Blue-White. And especially Blue-Black, games that end before turn 8, you have sub 50% win rate, which for 17 lands users is low because the average for 17 lands is 55. But if a game lasts 12 or more turns, all of a sudden you go more into the 59, 60% kind of win rates range.
Okay.
So if they manage to get those games longer, you are going to be winning. And White-Blue is a deck that has a very similar profile to Dimir, but the win rates are much lower. So Blue-White decks can go longer, but their win rate then is only 54%.
Okay, so it does go higher compared to the early turns, but it just doesn't go that high.
Early turns is going to be sub 50% again, but it just doesn't go as high as Dimir decks go. And then we can go to something like slide 20. And I also looked at how often do games end on those turns. So, of course, if you have a deck that has 100% win rate when the games last 10 turns or longer, but only manages to get to the turn 10% of the time, it's not going to be probably a good deck because, okay, it wins everything, but 90% of the time it doesn't get there. So it's not really good at implementing the plan. And I looked at those numbers of what percentage of games can be finished early or late for different decks, and actually noticed that Blue-White is the deck that has the biggest success rate in getting games to those later stages. So it is more efficient in getting the game beyond 10 turns than Dimir is, or than Orzhov, which is another one of those successful late game decks. Although Orzhov is a weird one because Orzhov is good also in the mid game, but also in the late game. So it's like having pretty high win rate across from turn 8 to late, while Dimir on turn 8 is still not doing very well.
Okay.
But those three decks were capable of getting it to the late game, but actually Azorius was the best one in doing so. And then I started thinking, okay, it's so good in getting to the late game. It has the better win rate in the longer games than it has in the shorter games. Can I use this data to actually figure out which cards should we be using? Because I think that this deck can have a higher win rate, but as players, we are maybe not putting all the right cards in them.
Okay.
And if you don't put all the right cards, your win rate is going to be dropped. And I did this analysis when I looked at, first of all, which cards, when they are in the deck, prolong the games the most. So I looked at the list of the cards in that archetype that were played somewhat frequently that make the games go past turn 10. And you have it on slide 31 if Jeff can link it to the people watching. But I had a very eclectic collection of cards that include cards that are neither white nor blue.
Oh, interesting.
And 17 lands looks at the archetypes and it includes splashes. And we see cards like Explosive Derailment. 41% of the games where Explosive Derailment was in the deck went past turn 10.
Oh, okay.
Then we have cards like Tyrant Scorn. We have Slick Sequence. We have Desert Dew. All those cards are very cheap interaction spells that are not necessarily in white. There is also Ariet's Lullaby, which is arguably a white card. And it's also a cheap interaction
Actually,
card.
also, yes.
Yeah. So all of those cheap interaction spells are the things that allow these decks to go much longer and probably get into the late game in a better shape, because you can kill those early aggression creatures, and in the late game you should be the one that has an advantage over the opponent. So problem with white and blue is that they don't have enough of those early interaction spells. So what you can do is, if you're drafting like a blue-white control, is get the deserts, because you want to have deserts because they commit crimes, and there are some benefits of committing crimes in general in any controlling format in here, in any controlling archetype. And once you're getting the deserts, you might as well put those explosive derailments, especially Desert's Dew is such a low-hanging fruit, because you want to have deserts, and this gets better with the more deserts you have. And it's a cheap interaction spell that can actually deal with the late threats and grows with the game, because you will draw so many cards that you're going to have, if you have 4 deserts in your deck, you're probably going to have 3 or 4 of them on the board by the late game. So all those cards help you prolong the game. And there are a couple of other things like Tomb Trawler, which is not exactly interaction, but an 0/4 is a pretty decent roadblock in here, because they either have to kill it, which will cost them half a turn or a turn, or they have to, or they will, you will gain like 6 life over the course of the game, because you will block their 2/2 and then not take the damage. And late in the game, of course, it can be an engine that stops you from milling yourselves out. Something that I actually did already in this format when I ran out of cards before my opponent ran out of life. Especially if you have like Bandit's Hole and you draw so many cards, or like not disinformation campaign. What's the intimidation campaign?
Yeah.
You can draw quite a lot of cards.
You can.
And then I went to the other part, because I showed you the list of the cards that make the games last longer. But of course, making the games last longer is not everything that you want. You want also to win those long games. So I also looked at the cards that have the highest win rate when the games go long, so over 10 turns. And actually, Desert's Dew was the number one. It had 70% win rate. Decks with Desert's Dew had 70% win rate when they got to turn 10 and longer. So that's like huge. Of course, it comes with a smaller sample size because it was a splash within a not so popular archetype. But even if you take that, maybe there's a plus minus 5 percentage points on this data, that will still make it like 60-something% win rate in those long games when you have Desert's Dew in your deck. And you can see that in slide 43 if Jeff wants to show that to the viewers. And then you have actually quite a lot of the same cards. You have Siphon Insight, Explosive Derailment, Jagged Barrens, which is weirdly the black-red desert in your blue-white deck. Mm-hmm. You have things like Baron Bertram Greywater, Hollow Marauder, all those kind of cards that you would more associate with the Dimir control deck can be easily splashed into a blue-white shell, and then it makes it a decent deck. Another card that I found quite surprising was Fell the Mighty, the bonus sheet, sort of rare.
Which card is that?
That's the one that destroy all creatures with power higher than the target creature.
Right.
And when you're playing a couple of 0-power creatures in your blue-white deck, which you can because there is the Armadillo, and there is the 0/4 that returns cards from graveyard to the bottom of your library. You can actually treat it as a Wrath that leaves you still a chunky blocker, and it has a decent win rate in those.
That's actually kind of cool, yeah. And that one actually just fits right in as a white card anyway, right?
Yeah, you also might be playing, the 0/5 Crab, for example, and that's another 0-power creature that can turn it into a Wrath. And there is Ariette the Beguiler, which is actually a good card in those decks because splashing black is relatively easy, and 4/4 Lifelinker is exactly what you want because it's a big roadblock for your opponents, and it will probably get you 4 life, which is quite huge because I think that the problem of those blue-white decks is that they arrive in the late game, but you arrive to the late game with like 4 life. And then opponent just plays, I don't know, Skewer the Critics and a Desert, and you're dead all of a sudden. Even though you had the game stabilized, but you cannot really stop every single threat. If you arrive to this late game at 10 life, you probably would have won. But since you arrive at 4, I had a lot of games with those type of decks in this format that I stabilize and I hang on for 4 turns, and then they find like 1 damage spell or a couple of deserts, and all of a sudden I'm dead. or I can't block all the creatures. I had to let one in. There's a combat trick, and I'm gone. And it wouldn't have happened if I was at a slightly healthier life total. And all the cards that I'm mentioning here that are improving the win rate of those blue-white decks are the cards that help you to survive to the late game in a much better state in terms of your life totals. So yeah, I think that generally for blue-white decks, the secret sauce to them is that they want to be multicolor decks that splash for cheap interaction.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, because what you're really looking for are kind of the hidden gems, right? You're, not the on the face obvious things in that color pair that would help prolong the game, but you're looking specifically for, for cards that you may not be considering that accomplish that goal. Interesting. Go ahead.
So because we analyze the win rates, obviously the cards that are played very frequently in those decks are not going to be the outliers. They can't, they physically can't be, because they are almost in every single one of those decks already.
Right.
So, if I have like, I don't know, what would be the good, like the Oblivion Ring. Now every white control deck wants to have the Oblivion Ring. So like 80% of them will have it, which means that the win rate of it will be around average, because that's how it works. If 80% of the decks contain it, if it's slightly above, that's a good signal for me that you really want to have it in your deck. But I'm not expecting it to be an outlier. Of course, the outliers are going to be the things that are played in a niche way, and I want to find specific cards. I can make different cutoff points. So, for example, in this particular analysis, I could maybe cut off those cards that are played under 500 times. I think, no, this is actually a cut to 500, but I could lift the limit that I want to look only at the cards that are played below 5,000 times in my data sets. And then I would get the cards that are more specifically white-blue and try to identify that these are the actually most important blue and white cards in those decks. But I didn't, because I was curious about exploring this blue-white as a sort of splashy archetype and splashing cheap interaction, which is not something that you would naturally think about. Like, you will hear content, and including my content, that will tell people not to splash cheap interaction. But I think that OTJ was the format that was a sort of like exception from that rule.
This might be too in the weeds, but I am just curious, like how you would approach it from a big picture perspective of, if you are going to try to pick up these little bumps in value, these little things that help enable a game plan that seems to work for these archetypes that are a little bit forgotten, a little bit left behind, perhaps. How do you know what to replace?
Which card not to play?
Yeah, like I know it's too specific for you to like give me card names, but just is it? I don't know. Like what are the types of cards that you would look at for? Okay, I'm gonna get this Desert Stew in here, and I'm gonna splash it. This is the type of card that can actually bump make the game last a little bit longer, which is kind of my goal. But what do I cut?
Okay. So I don't have unfortunately, the Azorius data. I don't have it opened. But I do have the Boros data open, and I can look at some of the.
Okay, and this is the other color pair that you looked at under this lens.
Yeah, because that was another color pair that I thought has a potential to have a higher win rate than it does on 17 lens, and I thought that people maybe are building those decks not correctly. I would look for cards that are played a lot, but have not such an amazing result. So, for example, in Boros, cards that are close to the bottom of win rate in terms of when you would want to be winning, but is played a lot, is Outlaw Medic, for example. People play it because it's an outlaw, because maybe the life linker with mercenaries, it works, but it has like a mediocre win rate, but it's played quite a lot. Also, it makes the games last longer, and it's something that you really don't want to be doing in playing the Boros decks. I need to do a 2-second sorting of the data.
No problem.
Sorry, we're doing data analysis live on LR.
Oh, I like it. All right.
That's the kind of content you're getting into when I'm on. So cards that are played quite a lot and are having not impressive win rate. Iron Fist Pulverizer, for example, in white-red. It's been played not like super frequently, but there's like a good several thousand games played with it. It has a pretty bad win rate, and it does exactly what you don't want to be doing. I see all the basic lands that are not white and red as cards that are actively decreasing your win rate, which shows that here, unlike in the previous archetype, when I told you that splashing is actually beneficial for the Azorius decks, for the Boros decks, splashing is an absolute no. It harms your chances of winning the games. Which is Bridled Bighorn? Is that the 4-mana mount?
The 3/4, yeah.
Yeah. That card is not doing that phenomenally. Quill Charger. So all those kind of like mid-rangey threats are not doing particularly well because they don't have an amazing win rate, and they also make the game last not as much as you would like to do.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have like cards like on top we have like bombs. So we have like Crackle with Power and Hellspur Posse Boss. But if we look at the cards that are actually played quite a lot, Lassoed by the Law, Scalestorm Summoner, which is one of the better cards in this particular color combination. And you wouldn't think so, because this is a Power 4 synergy card. That's the 3/3 that when it attacks and you control something with Power 4, you get a 3/1. But this is one of the best cards in this actual archetype in terms of win rate. It's only one uncommon is better, and that's Lassoed by the Law, which you would expect would happen. And it's got a better win rate than Dust Animus in those decks. When you think about it, it sort of makes sense. Dust Animus is a 5-drop practically, if you want to cast it for full value. And this is a 3-drop that can make an overwhelming board. So, you want to put cards like Prickly Pear. Frontier Seeker is actually decent in those decks. All those cards make games last shorter and have pretty high win rates. So that's what you want to put. And what you don't want to put is all the cards that are making the games longer and don't have an impressive win rate like the ones that I mentioned before. And if I would be looking at it, I would be focusing on the cards that are having large sample sizes, because if something is not having a good win rate but has a large sample size, it means that this is a card that traps people into thinking it should be fitting in this particular archetype, but it's probably not. Okay.
Yeah, like those 4-drops that you mentioned, those kind of just middling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where you really want to be like lower curve in those decks, or you want to try to get the job done by the time.
So for
those
example,
cards
like Quilt Charger, in my data set, I have 6,000 games with Quilt Charger in it, and they have win rate that is not particularly impressive. And at the same time, Scalestorm Summoner has a 5,000 sample size in terms of how often it was played. Now, obviously, Scalestorm Summoner is a higher pick than Charger, so maybe people just don't manage to pick it. But I'm pretty sure that there's been situations where people pick the Porcupine over the Summoner, and the cards are just very different in terms of win rate. How they do.
Yeah, and the Summoner's an uncommon
too,
card. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the card you mentioned? Nurturing Pixie?
Nurturing Pixie has a pretty decent win rate and pretty good impact on the game duration. So that's maybe one card that people don't know.
Are you using, like, if I wanted to replicate this, are you are the numbers that you were just quoting in the context of white-red, or are they just the straight-up games in hand win rate off of 17 lands?
No. You need to go through the hell of getting the public data sets, filtering them out, extracting the essence of those data, summing up every single game that ended on turn 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and by color pair. It took me roughly 4 days to get this done.
Okay, so this is data scientist stuff, not look it up online stuff.
If you are like moderately handy with coding, because I wouldn't recommend it to someone who doesn't have an idea how to work around it with data. But if you're okay with coding, you can use Pandas or something. You can get this data relatively quick.
What if I'm an expert at using the Magic Online interface? Do I qualify?
then you can do it in Excel because you already are an expert.
Okay.
Did you say that was a nice setup, Marshall? Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, well, good stuff. That's really interesting, and this is actually something that we, Luis and I, had talked about before, and this is a really good illustration of what we were talking about, which is, this idea of when we get to this point in the format, people kind of know what's up, right? The low hanging fruit has all been picked. It's easy to see, broad strokes, things like color pairs and individual cards that are overperforming or performing really well. If you take, much less than the 4 days you were talking about, just to go on to 17 lands, you're going to be able to get a snapshot of some of what's going on. But, much like when the poker boom happened and is still happening, the edges that people go for get smaller, right? They're, when poker first started getting popular, if you just knew like a basic strategy at all, you were probably better than most of the players that you would be playing against, but over time, those things become the norm. And now, people are using solvers in poker to track down little, they add up, but individually small edges that take a long time to express themselves. And you just don't get those big chunks coming your direction anymore. And this is an example of Magic having matured, where the formats the word solved is maybe a little aggressive, but they get solved quickly. And then we have some amount of data at our disposal, even just as a non-data scientist. We can poke around on 17 lands and really start to get an idea of stuff.
And, you will get like 75% as far as I got in that analysis. Like the extra 4 days were just to get to bridge the remaining 25 percentage points. Because if you go on 17 lands, if you just sort it by cards that are good in Boros, and you will see that something is having pretty low win rate but high play rate, you can figure out that this one is a trap. I just more specifically look at those cards through the lens of impacting the game length, because I want to figure out the plan, and I can know this plan because I figure out the game length distribution and stuff like that. This is extras and fancy, but 75% of the way you'll get there just by clicking on the 17 lands and just sorting the table. And that's absolutely fine if you want to get to the basic level of that. And you will definitely improve as a player if you start looking at those kind of things.
Okay. Well, I'll put a link to Magic Numbers. This is 119, right? The one we've been referencing here. Yep,
sure. My LR viewers can get access to my Patreon content, no problem.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Well, I just meant the episode, not the.
I mean it. Let them have the nice taster of how this feels to be in a very exclusive group of being my patrons.
Okay, yeah. I sorry, I did not mean to suggest that. I just meant the episode, but yeah, if you don't mind, that they'd probably love to take a look at your.
No. The slides of the episode are my Patreon sort of bonus, because I don't have anything else to offer as a human being. I can only offer slides.
Okay, well, I'll do that if you're okay with it, and they can get a look at what you're talking about. Yeah, and then of course anybody who appreciates it or wants to hang around can of course become a patron of Sierko as well and support him over there.
Seamless plug. Seamless.
Yeah. But yeah, this is great stuff. I mean, and again, if we're talking about people who want to shore up every edge that they can, this is the type of stuff that can help you find those gaps within a given archetype. I mean, look, we're down the rabbit hole here, right? I mean, we're talking about specific archetypes. They're also not the top archetypes, right? These are ones that you end up with every once in a while. But when you do, this is what can bring that from being kind of a real losing proposition up to something that might actually get you a trophy.
But, I've been talking earlier about my experience of the format and how I found my success in Gruul. I mean, I didn't play like hundreds of drafts, but I played enough. And I think that red-green, I played 5 times and I lost 4 games in those 5 drafts. Because I figured out like a particular niche for myself. I did it by accident without using the data or anything, just by theory crafting. But somewhere in that data, there are other people who figured out blue-white, who figured out red-white. And you won't gain much advantage by looking, oh yes, Selesnya is good and improving on Selesnya, because we know that Selesnya is good. You can probably put together a couple of 2-drops, some payoffs, and you're absolutely fine. But if you look at the data and you realize that maybe there is something more to be won using those niche archetypes, like Orzhov. Orzhov was not popular at all in the beginning of the format. Now it's a bit more a known quantity, and we know that it's actually a good archetype. But in the first days, I was sitting and looking at how those Orzhov decks are built, because I figured out that it's very underplayed, but it has a very high win rate. And those Orzhov uncommons are wheeling quite a lot. The Baron Bertram and the lawless, reckless, whatever. The 3/2 that kills things, yeah?
Yeah.
And actually, by the way, it kills anything. It can kill a permanent, which was a pretty useful feature of that thing. And of course, that has passed, and people know that Orzhov is good, but I think that right now Boros is still underdrafted. I think that there are good Azorius decks to be drafted as well, because blue is relatively open. You only have to figure out how to make those things tick slightly better, and you go from this 53% win rate deck to a 57% win rate deck, which is a difference between something that is mediocre to something that is actually actively good in the format.
Yeah.
And you can find that using the data. And by exploring it a bit yourself and having your own thoughts about how you would theory craft those decks, you can get quite far, I think.
Where can people find the non-Patreon exclusive content from you? We'll put this one up, but just in general.
The non-Patreon exclusive, and it's, as I said, very exclusive group of people. You can find me on any podcast platform as Magic Numbers. I also have Twitch, Sierkovitz, where I stream them live, so you can actually come in and ask some questions during the recording if you don't get something, which is with me very, very, very likely, because I always get myself convoluted into loops and lose track of what I was doing. I have some written content on mtgazone.com. Actually, I just wrote an article about Ikoria and all the hidden archetypes.
Oh, nice.
So if you feel like dipping your toes in Ikoria while it lasts till the next Tuesday, I think, you might want to catch up on this and learn about my reverse mutate idea of an archetype, when you first start with the hexproof creature and then start mutating on top of it.
Is that out now? Can I link that too?
Yeah, I can ping you a link.
Okay.
And yeah, of course, one of the, you can't find me there, although you can find traces of my gameplay activity, but 17lands.com is the place that makes my whole existence possible. So please do support those as well, because I'm the secondary market of the data. They are the actually more important people, and they do need love and hugs and holding hands, because every set there is something changed in the logs and they have to figure it out on the run, and then early access is canceled, and
that must be a pain. Well, hopefully we can get your Patreon a little bit less exclusive than it is now, Sierkovitz. Thanks for coming on the show. We look forward to having you back on again soon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Luis, anything to add before we take off? Did you win your draft?
I'm not playing a draft, I'll have you know. But
are you testing constructed?
No, the Pro Tour is with Modern Horizons 3, so can't do too much before that shows up, though. It's going to be good.
What do you mean? Marshall is jamming them left and right.
I got to do one.
Not all of us were invited to exclusive unveilings.
Yeah, I only got to do the one. All right, well, let's call it a show there. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV, and I'll put Sierko's Twitter/X.com profile in the show notes, as well as his Ikoria article and exclusive behind-the-scene look at the slides that he has for his patrons here, just because he's nice and he decided to share it with our viewers as well. So that'll be in the show notes. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And we just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of our patrons, as well as Ultimate Guard, for supporting the show. That's going to do it for this one. We will see you next week.
All right. So thinking about Sierkovitz saying, with 17 lands, everything in my life is possible. I was just thinking, let's walk through a day in Sierkovitz's life if he had a 17 lands interface for everything. So
oh, I like this.
He wakes up, gets ready to go. It's time to drive to work, but he has to decide, okay, do I take the freeway or do I take the streets? The freeway is faster on average, but sometimes you get whammied. And if you get an unexpected traffic jam, there's some outliers there. So do you want to?
I honestly did it with my road to work. I picked my route based on exactly this.
You got him, Luis.
I just got him right there.
Right there. Oh, that's incredible.
And so you run the numbers and you're like, what? I'll take the more consistent route where it takes me 4 minutes longer, but it never takes me 15 minutes longer. He gets to work and, his boss gives him an assignment and Sierkovitz has to think. He's like, well, if I pawn this assignment off on my coworker, in the short game, I get a pretty substantial edge. But if I'm going to be working here for a while, I got to play for the long game. The average number of years at this position leads me to have a higher victory condition if I just do the work I'm assigned, as opposed to pawning it off onto hapless assistants, which will run out. Sierkovitz, as always, plays for the long game here, so he's gonna. All right, I won't defect. I won't shirk my responsibilities. Manages to get through work, making the highest EV play, of course, as possible. And then goes to the grocery store and is going to pick up something to make for dinner. And it's like, well, this noodles with pasta sauce, this is, this you can get this pretty late. It's pretty cheap, low resources. But I'm going to have to explain to my wife why we're having this 6 days in a row, because it is the highest EV play. And then you look at what the disaster scenario is, which is your wife being angry at you because you cooked pasta 6 days in a row, and you're now looking at maybe day number 7.
My wife is Italian, yeah.
Yeah,
she will not get angry. She will not get angry on me cooking pasta 6 days in a row.
Well, in that case, you've discovered an exploit. You've discovered an underdrafted deck. You get way more value than the average person out of this.
I can basically force pasta.
Yeah.
Yep, and just forces pasta aggro every day, and then Sierkovitz gets home. He's making dinner. He's but his kids need him for something, and he's like, well. Again, this is one of those decisions where long term it's better to help them because then eventually they can do it themselves. But if I just do it real quick and don't really teach them how to do it short term, I'll be much better off. And he decided, I played for the long term enough. I'm going to play for the short term this evening. I'm just going to do it for them. I'm not going to walk through the whole process, and that way I can get to bed a little bit earlier because the expected value of getting 8 hours of sleep. Well, you can get an extra win, maybe a win and a half tomorrow, and he just follows the 17 lands decision tree every single time. And at the end of it, what did you say? Did it work?
I think that one miss that you made. I think that generally that was perfect view of how I operate in real life, except for one thing. I'm not going to get 8 hours of sleep because Ikoria is on Arena only till Tuesday. I better milk that for all it's worth.
That's true. There's no long game when it comes to Ikoria. It's only there for a week. So you'll take the hit. In various ports of your life where getting six hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep impacts you, but you've made enough good long-term EV decisions that you can perform a little bit lower than average for the next week.
I gained those 4 minutes by picking the right road from home, from work.
Well, no, here's the problem though. In a Ikoria week, you actually are supposed to take the higher variance but lower average time route, so you get more. You get to front load that time and maybe get a little more Ikoria in.
Must be my favorite sign off so far.